Well, hello there friends, and welcome back to the channel. Today we have more Star Wars to discuss, and thankfully it's a new game. As to be honest, I'm finding most of the Star Wars TV series harder to stomach these days, unless we're talking about Andor, which was pretty outstanding. So the games are really what's keeping Star Wars alive for me these days, personally. So unless you've been living under a rock for the last few weeks, then you probably would have by now eyeballed the two new trailers that were released for Star Wars Outlaws. If I'm completely honest with you all, I didn't know too much about this game before the trailers were dropped, and it's kind of taken me by surprise. Although there is a lot of buzz and equal amounts of trepidation for this new game, I honestly keep finding more and more reasons to get excited for what potentially could be a very thrilling version of Red Dead Redemption in space, kind of. Star Wars Outlaws has been developed by the studio Massive Entertainment, most famous for the Division games, which I've been told have only got bigger and better over the years, and this all comes under the umbrella of Ubisoft. It could be a little concerning that Massive Entertainment is pushing out two huge titles in such close succession. We have Avatar Frontiers of Pandora coming this December, and then Outlaws next year sometime. They are a huge studio, so I will remain optimistic for now. Star Wars often has a Western vibe to it, and that certainly is the case with Outlaws, as it is set between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi movies, in a few remote locations of the Outer Rim. You play an outlaw by the name of Kay Vess, who hopefully will turn out to be a joy to play rather than finding her irritating from start to finish. I'm slightly on the fence on this, as the trailers didn't offer enough of her dialogue and story to convince me either way. Maybe it was her confident and cocksure personality that just needs a little more time to warm to, and it's impossible to critique just on what we've seen so far. But I am very intrigued by the style and theme of the game, from the dirty dealings with criminal syndicates and the Empire to the stealthy and tactical gameplay and combat. It appears fairly unique from what we've seen and seems to safely set itself aside from other recent Star Wars games we've had. The time period is very interesting, as I said. It's between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, when there was a lot of war between the Empire and the Rebels, as well as a lot of civil unrest with the populations on most planets. So one would assume that most criminal organisations would be taking advantage of this by working for the highest bidder and not taking sides. So this is where Kay Vess comes into the story. We start as an outlaw and thief, just laying low and surviving by taking all manner of jobs just to get by. We're not alone though, as you've always got to have some companion in these big story-driven games, and in this adventure we have ND5, a reprogrammed battle-damaged commando droid, who will assist Kay sometimes in missions, by the looks of it, and also sort of be your ship's caretaker in a way. So if the game is asking us to forget about Jedi and lightsabers and wants us to focus a little more on the common folk and criminals that live in this galaxy, great. That's fantastic. We need a Star Wars game that is a little more boots on the ground, I think. And I really did love playing Jedi Survivor, but when the novelty of using force powers has kind of run its course, then it's nice to have other options. In the game we'll be interacting with all sorts of savoury and non-savoury characters, just trying to carve a living in this existence, and most of our encounters will include many criminal syndicates and officers from the Empire, which we can either work for, gaining reputation, or work against, earning distrust. And yes, reputation will be a big thing in this game that will hopefully be all down to how we want to play it and who we decide to faction with. It would be incredible if I chose to side with one faction and meanwhile my friend on his playthrough decided to help the Empire, just for a bit of variety. But Star Wars Outlaws does appear to be a very choice matters game that may offer alternative pathways and endings to the story. We may have the chance to fall deeper into the clutches of the crime world by accepting certain dialogue choices or siding with the wrong people, and in doing so will perhaps lead to a very negative story outcome. Then if there is a positive narrative, this may stem from choosing the morally correct dialogue options, even if it temporarily puts you in a bit of a pickle. I'm just speculating, but most RPGs have this mechanic built in these days, and I would assume Outlaws is no different. Having these alternate pathways in big open world RPGs is a great incentive to replay the game as well. So if we just take in and enjoy the gameplay trailer for what it is, the first thing that caught my attention and got my motor pumping was the open world aspect and all the charm that usually comes with it. Aside from the third person perspective that you get to play the game in, there were a few noticeable things that gave me some warm vibes as I started to compare Outlaws to Red Dead Redemption, a game that I will forever love and spent far too many hours just roaming the countryside and experiencing all the random encounters that the game had to offer. Back to Outlaws though, having a currency system in an open world RPG is one of the main mechanics that gives you a real sense of purpose in the world, or galaxy in this case. We should also assume that next to the basic spending cash you receive from missions and probably trading, there will also be collectibles and valuable items that possibly could be traded for unique upgrades, rewards or abilities, etc. Not only this, but I suspect, at least on a basic level, there will have to be some kind of crafting system that will be incorporated into player tools, weapons and ship upgrades. Another more obvious link to Red Dead was the Deadeye ability similarity. I loved in Red Dead using the Deadeye gauge to slow down time and line up some perfect headshots on a group of ne'er-do-wells, and thankfully we can do that here it seems. It always comes in very handy and is the perfect complement for when riding those fast vehicles without the worry of having to control the steering for a short time. We haven't seen much of the many planets and space stations we will visit other than the very arid looking planet that is home to Jauntus Hope, the town hub we see in the trailer. I gotta say though, watching Kay whiz around on a speeder bike through trails and jumping off ramps makes me very optimistic about the exploration of Outlaws. I mean, how many vehicles will there be for navigating the planet's surface alone? Can we upgrade those vehicles to do awesome things? I hope so, as there was an option that popped up on screen to use a workbench within your ship. And I do really hope that the workbench is not just for cosmetics. I hope it's to boost stats and, to actually change things. The terrain and the map design looks to be fairly well crafted and is leaps ahead of the kind of extremely contained design of Jedi Survivor. And yes, I know the Jedi games are not properly open world and it was from a different studio as well, but I'm just making a comparison. Even if it isn't as beautiful in the small details as the map in Red Dead 2, then who cares? Just having stretches of open land to throttle your speeder bike across will be kind of a big win for us Star Wars fans, right? Okay, spaceflight. Wow, let's talk about spaceflight. This took me by surprise, and I suppose it shouldn't have, as it is said to be the first proper Star Wars open world game, so how else would you get about, right? With the concept of open world being applied to more and more space games like the mighty Starfield coming this September, it's still a bit of a new concept within the space sim genre. I mean, okay, so you have No Man's Sky with its unlimited worlds, and Starfield will still have a high number of procedurally generated content. However, to have both a well-crafted story as well as fully handcrafted locations in an open world that spans numerous planets and space stations is possibly a first for a space game with this kind of AAA production value. I think certain aspects of flying the ships will remain pretty basic and simplified for a smooth arcade feeling, like you'll still have your standard shields and ship health. And we can see from the footage that there is the option to use some kind of repair tool, and then possibly an auto turret it looks like, a speed boost for sure, and some stylistic evade manoeuvres which looked pretty damn good. But your ship design, it looks very nice if I'm honest, not too fancy but not the Falcon either, and the combat looks engaging, maybe enough to entertain most seasoned flight sim veterans I would say. Outlaws also has one thing Starfield doesn't, and that is the seamless planet entry, which means you can fly from space and land on any planet without any animated transition. This definitely isn't a make or break component for me, but I do appreciate that most people will get a better sense of freedom and immersion by being able to have a greater level of control over flight and travel in the galaxy. Now everyone is talking about the Wanted system and making comparisons to GTA and Red Dead 2 of course, and rightly so. It's another example of using great game mechanics to bring the world alive by making you feel the repercussions of your decisions, essentially. I do wonder how well it will be implemented though. This was one of the few issues I had with Red Dead 2 because it sometimes felt very rigged. I would bring a criminal into town and suddenly I was the bad guy, or I was just walking, minding my own business, and some lady bumps into me and falls. Well, guess whose side the law took in that dispute? Thanks, Red Dead. We only see in the trailer that the wanted level arose from the dialogue option not to bribe the Imperial officer, but I would assume you can also gain wanted levels from normal criminal activities like, I don't know, stealing, shooting in town, or maybe just being a pest. And I guess if you're good enough, you can just fly around killing TIE fighters with a wanted level as long as possible before you hyperdrive out of there. So will this give you more XP and loot, or is the XP system only quest based perhaps? I'd also love to know if your wanted level is galaxy wide or just restricted to regions. It does kind of make sense to have the same wanted level wherever you go in the galaxy, but this would also make you think twice about everything you do and say to people in dialogue. If anyone does know the answer to these questions, then please let us know in the comments, as I can't find anything else while digging around myself. I am very much looking forward to the combat, I will say, as I love it when you have a choice in how you want to tackle any situation. And it's massively evident that you can go in guns blazing and use every weapon at your disposal, or, if you're like me, then most of the time I will be trying my best to ghost areas and pick off enemies without being seen. This sneaky trait has stayed with me ever since I used to play Thief by Looking Glass Studios way back in the day. I have no idea if there will be greater rewards for remaining hidden or if it will affect the outcome of your skill XP as it does in Cyberpunk. We'll just have to wait for more info to come on that, unfortunately. But hopefully, for us stealth assassins out there, it will be a fun and rewarding challenge as we drop body after body and use our little critter friend to help us out along the way. So definitely a huge deviation from many other Star Wars games, and something a little more reminiscent of the Star Wars 1313 game that was never released for sad reasons. And the more I think about it, Outlaws looks to be very akin to what we missed out on with 1313. So maybe the studio had this in mind and also realised that we fans really did want that game, and well, maybe we're sort of getting it now. Now we know the time the game is set in, can we expect to see any cameos of characters we know, and will our story lead to any of the events in Return of the Jedi? We do briefly see our beloved reckless smuggler with that famous sarcastic wit being delivered to Jabba the Hutt, but as for anyone else, I would bet your boots we will probably see someone. Although I do believe they are trying to keep that on the down low and promote Outlaws as a beast of its own, giving you the feeling that you are forging your own path and rising from these backwater planets to do something truly great. It almost sounds eerily similar to Andor if you ask me, and I kinda love that. Well, nobody knows where the story of the game will ultimately lead, but the developer team have said that it will involve a heist. It could simply be that you steal something important that aids the Rebel Alliance in defeating the Empire in Return of the Jedi. Or maybe it only relates to the story in Outlaws, who knows right now. I do have some concerns, and that is if the game is fun and exciting at the start but then becomes repetitive and a grind near the end. This was always my problem with some other open world games like Assassin's Creed, which sometimes became boring to finish because it felt like they just used the same formula over and over. Therefore, I do hope the game has ways to keep you interested all the way through, whether it be missions, enemy types or exploration. I just don't want it to be the same all the way through, you know. So keep us guessing with the story and make the combat challenging and thought-provoking. Also, I know it sounds silly, but add loads of secrets within the maps. I always love it in open world games when I drift off the beaten path and discover precious loot or information in places you just wouldn't expect. So let me know, guys and girls, if you are also very eager to try out this game next year. I do have some doubts, but for the most part I'm very excited for this one as it's so different to other Star Wars games, honestly. The space combat looks addictive and intense, as well as the ground fighting, and the story about a heist gone wrong and where that will lead us is very appealing. But if you've made it this far, then firstly thank you, and also don't worry, I'll keep you posted as and when we learn more about this new and exciting game. But Ubisoft has said it will be a release sometime in 2024. Sadly a bit of a wait, but looks to be worth the wait, and I don't want studios to rush anymore, as we've all seen the results far too often of that. So in the meantime, take care of yourselves, subscribe if you want to kindly help me out, and I'll see you very soon. Bye bye.